Well, hi everyone, and on behalf of St Anne's Church, welcome to this video recording in preparation for our weekly Tuesday evening Bible study, for which we're currently studying the first letter of John in the New Testament. And this week we're looking at chapter 4. For those people who are viewing this presentation who may not know me, my name is Rev'd Stephen Morgan, and I'm Assistant Minister at Chasetown. And as we look at chapter 4 of John's letter, just as we've heard in the previous two sessions of our study, which were led by Chris Hawthorne and Angela Smith, in chapter 4 we find John again commenting about God's love, as well as continuing to address issues concerning what he considers to be false teaching and false prophecy that are emerging in the early church and which were prevalent in the culture and context of that society at the time. And these are very important issues that John is seeking to address as they question Jesus' humanity and divinity. And therefore they appear to bring into doubt Jesus' position and status in the Godhead that we call the Trinity, who we as Christians traditionally refer to God as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But firstly, why does John keep addressing the same themes throughout this letter? Well, I believe we must remember that unlike the Apostle Paul, who was a well-educated lawyer and who wrote in a very structured and linear pattern, in comparison, John was a very ordinary person, and together with the rest of the original disciples who were called by Jesus, he wasn't someone who was regarded as being well-educated. Also, we must remember that John was by trade in the day a fisherman, and he was now writing this letter in his old age, in around the year round about 90 AD, which was some 60 years after he would have first heard Jesus saying to him these words, "Follow me." And so John writes his letter in a very secular pattern, in which he consistently, as I say, repeats the issues that are at the forefront of his mind, in the hope, I believe, that those who are reading his letter or listening to the words won't be able to escape the wisdom and truth that he passionately believes they impart. And top of the list for John of his concerns at the beginning of chapter 4 are his concerns about the dangers of false teaching and false prophets that have emerged in the early church and society, and which he aims to address by instructing the believers to test the spirits so that you can recognize the true Spirit of God. Above all else, John is keen to provide to the church and to all believers a solid assurance of who Jesus is and in the claims that Jesus made about himself. And John's hope is that having faith in Jesus as God's Son is something that will be a passionate following and call for everyone. And in week 1 of our study on the first letter of John, our vicar Richard Westwood spoke about a heresy mentioned by John in the letter known as Gnosticism. And this was a teaching by Greek philosophers which promoted the belief that the physical and the spiritual realms of life and the world were separate, and that the physical was evil and only the spiritual was good. And therefore the Gnostics applied this teaching to Jesus and claimed that Jesus could not be human and divine, as how can God become something that is physical, something that is considered to be evil? And that's something that the Greeks really thought about life. However, as we know from reading the opening words of the first chapter of John's Gospel, for John, the incarnation in which God took on human flesh and was born as one of us is fundamental to the Christian teaching and the Christian faith. And therefore, John believes that everything boils down to what we think about Jesus, who we believe Jesus was, and more importantly, ultimately, who we believe Jesus is. So by testing the spirits, John states that every spirit that acknowledges that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, but that every spirit that does not acknowledge Jesus in this way is not from God and is therefore the spirit of the Antichrist, which John states in his letter. The Antichrist is something that is coming, and even now is something that is present in the world. And so, through the claims he is making in his letter, and particularly in this chapter, we can see that John presents his arguments very much in black and white terms, using absolutes and opposites with no middle ground. For example, when speaking about the spirit of the world, John uses terms such as they and them and the Antichrist, who he claims speak from the viewpoint of the world, and that those who are of the world listen to them and understand them. While on the other hand, when speaking about the Spirit of God, John speaks in terms of we, you, and you, dear children, who have overcome the world, because John claims that the one who is in you is greater than the one who is in the world. And as the chapter progresses, John continues to write and express his arguments in terms of absolutes and opposites. He speaks of life or death, light or darkness, truth or lies, and of love or hate. And it's very interesting to note from looking at this letter and this chapter that it can be argued how we, who live in today's world, have perhaps become increasingly discouraged from speaking and seeing things in terms of black and white and from using absolutes and opposites. Rather, in today's world, it could be argued that we live in an age of relativism, which means that nothing is either true or false, but that everything is just an opinion. In other words, there can be no black or white, or absolutes or opposites. Everything is just shades of grey. However, here in chapter 4 of his first letter, John is arguing in absolute terms that when we're talking about Jesus, the physical and the spiritual, the human and the divine has been totally integrated, and that the Greek philosophers and the Gnostics who taught otherwise are false prophets and were spreading false teaching. But let us remember that John was a first-hand witness throughout the 3 years of Jesus' earthly ministry, and he described Jesus as the Word who became flesh and lived among us. Indeed, John said of Jesus, "We have seen his glory, the glory of the one who is the one and only Son, who came from the Father and who was full of grace and truth." John knew Jesus. He says, though those of us who saw him, heard him, and who touched him, he didn't know Jesus as a spooky apparition who just appeared to be someone who was human. He saw the human side of Jesus and the divine side of Jesus in its fullness. Also, in addition to false prophets and teaching in the second part of chapter 4, John reiterates his message about God's love. He writes, "Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God, and everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love God does not know God, because God is love. Now, furthermore, John writes, "This is love, not that we have loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins." And if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. Someone once asked a famous Christian teacher and preacher, why did God create humanity? And the answer that was given was that God had a son. Right from the beginning of time, God had a son whom he loved, and he wanted a bigger family. God wanted to create humanity so that he could share his love with a larger circle, with a larger family. And we know that throughout the history of humanity, we know that some people have accepted God's love and tried to follow God's way, while others have not and have gone their own way. What John would say is the way of the world. And so through his letter and through these statements, John is communicating something that is very, very important for us to grasp. How do you know who is a child of God? Well, according to John, there is a family likeness. Because as John has hinted, the children of God will always reflect God's character. And therefore, if God is love, they will express love to others and also love to God. If God is light, they will express and embrace and reflect God's light in their own life and towards others. Furthermore, John makes it clear that we cannot say we love God, who we can't see, if we do not love others, who we can see. And obviously in the text he's using the example of a brother, but obviously some of us don't have brothers, we only have sisters, and obviously that applies to them and to everybody as well. But that message is core as a Christian. How can we say we love God, who we can't see, if we do not love others? Also, it's very interesting to note that John is the only writer in the whole of the Holy Bible to make the statement, God is love. And I think, as Angela mentioned during last week's study, it's only through God's love working in us and being in us that we can find ourselves able to love and care for people who we may not normally like, and in doing so have the confidence and the assurance that we are a child of God. But this is the crucial message that John is giving, the crucial message of Christianity. He wants us to understand what God is like, and he wants us to have fellowship with God and to tell others and to let others know of how we have come to know God, so that they too can have fellowship with him too. And central to this message is the command that Jesus gave John and the original disciples, that he asked to pass on to the whole of humanity going forward, which includes us now, to love one another, because through this all people will know that you are my disciples. And as John said, if we can't love each other, who we can see, how can we claim to love God, who we can't see? So that's the introduction to the Bible study that will take place on Tuesday evening on the 2nd of February. I do hope that you'll be able to join us. If you haven't joined us before, you're very, very welcome. Please go onto the St Anne's Chasetown website, and then you'll find on the front screen of the website there a link, a title that says St Anne's Church during coronavirus. If you click on that link, then it will take you to a list of our events that are taking place. And if you scroll down to the Tuesday evening Bible study and click on the Zoom link there, then as soon as you do that, when the meeting starts at 7:30, the host will then let you in to the meeting. So do hope that you can join us. And just to let you know that we'll also, in the context of chapter 4 and what we've been studying, there are 3 questions that I'd like us to discuss and to consider. And the first question is this. In his letter, John warns his readers about false prophets and false teaching, telling them to test the spirits to see whether they're from God. And he gives some examples there in the text. But what is our experience of this? What is our feelings about this, about testing the spirits and false prophets and false teaching that we've perhaps experienced or we see in the world today? Question 2, John was the disciple who recorded Jesus' words as saying, I am the way, the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And so, if this is really true, what do we think about those people who don't accept this truth or can't accept this truth, and those who believe and follow what they consider to be a different truth, a different way? What are our feelings about this, and how should we respond to this challenge? And thirdly and lastly, how do we live out and experience John's message about God's love in the church and in our own lives and in the world today? Because as John said at the end of his letter talking about love, this is the most important thing, loving others as God has called us to do. And that because at the end of the day there are people around us who we can see, and if we claim to love God and we don't carry out this command, then are we really followers of God? So 3 questions for us to consider and to discuss together. So if you can join us, great. Look forward to seeing you online at 7:30 on Tuesday the 2nd of February. But for now, God bless and see you all again soon. Bye.